My name is Carly Warner. I'm a proud Palawa woman and I'm off country, and I thank the Gadigal and the Eora for keeping me and my family safe. I'm the chair of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, the peak body for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, and I am the CEO as my paid gig of the Aboriginal Legal Service in New South Wales and the ACT. We're here today because the right to free, culturally safe legal help is under threat. This crisis is affecting every single Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal service right across Australia. At its heart, this is a funding crisis. It is a systemic issue of the government and successive parliaments undervaluing our essential work. And while we've always been underfunded, we're now at breaking point. Demand for our services has doubled in some areas, but our Commonwealth core funding has decreased in real terms. I'm sure you all felt the crunch of inflation and the rising cost of living, and our organisations have certainly felt it too. Needless to say, this is also coming off the back of an exceptionally difficult few years for us all through the COVID pandemic. Today's discussion is a big one, and we want it to be interactive because your voices are important. Now, you should all see a QR code on the screen. If you can scan that with your phone, it will take you to an interactive tool where you'll be able to participate in some questions and answers along the way. Thanks, Catalina. There will also be a link to that website in the chat. So if you don't have a mobile handy, you can click on your laptop, or if you're joining from a mobile, you can open the chat, click the link and keep listening on your device while you're giving us feedback in the tool. Once you've scanned the QR code or used the link to get into the interactive tool, please click the love heart on your screen to let us know that you're in there. I can see those love hearts now. There is also a Q&A button, so feel free to submit questions anytime. Look, while we may not be able to answer all of your questions today, we definitely want to make a note of them. They're really important. Firstly, we'd like to know where everyone is joining us from. So please jump into that interactive tool to share whose land you are joining on today. And if you're having any trouble, please feel free just to type it into the chat. Everybody's getting that? Thank you. Okay. I'm just going to give that another moment. A couple more questions before we get to hear from our community members. Can you describe in a word what our work means to you? Pop your answers into the interactive tool. All the answers will be anonymous on the screen, so there's no judgment. And also remember, Catalina and Jane are available in the chat for tech support. Resistance, strength, power, protection, transformative, so many things coming through. Dignity, pride, Indigenous rights and justice. Wow. A last question before we hear from community members personally. We want to get a sense of who's in the room today. So we want to know maybe which one of these best describes you. I'm an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community member. I work in the sector, or I'm an ally and supporter. Lots of people from the sector. Great to see you, Mob, joining. Thank you. And we could not do this without our allies and supporters. Okay. Before we get to our community members, I do want to say, as many of you will have seen in the event registration, we did invite the Commonwealth Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, and the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, to join us today and to answer your questions. But unfortunately, they have both sent their apologies due to other commitments. However, the Attorney General has provided a statement for me to share with you, and I'll do that in a little bit. But first, let's listen to the voices of people with lived experience of how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal services make a difference. We are joined by Uncle Percy Lovett, Matthew Cash, and Michaela Reynolds. Sadly, what all three of these fantastic people have in common is the loss of a loved one and an experience in a coronial inquest. So just a warning that we will be saying the names of people who have passed away. As we go through this discussion, we want to remind you that you can always jump into the interactive tool or use the chat to ask any questions that come up during this session. We definitely want to hear from you. But first, I'm going to go to Uncle Percy Lovett. Uncle Percy, thank you so much for joining us. And I also know that you're a big crook today as well. So an extra shout out to you. The Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service represented you after the death of your partner, Michaela Nelson, and my absolute condolences to you. Can you tell us a bit about your story?
Me and Veronica got together about 22 years ago. We've been together for 22 years, and she was arrested 2020, the day before New Year's. I can't. Sorry.
It's completely understandable, Uncle Percy. And again, I just want to thank you for coming today and for joining us. We all can only imagine what you've been through, and I'm going to pivot now and say and introduce Matthew Cash, who we have with us. Matt, you were also supported by the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service after your sister, Nish, passed away. Do you mind sharing some of your experience with us?
No, that's fine. So my sister passed away about 3 years ago in Melbourne. Some of the complexities we have is I'm in Queensland. I didn't know who to turn to for aid or to even help. I was directed to Bowles through actually another legal service. So my sister reached out for help through the 000 Esther. And unfortunately, by the time help came to her, it was too late. So there was a lot of issues that happened through the emergency services that fell through the gaps from just sense of urgency to assisting my sister. So unfortunately, she had mental health issues, abuse issues, and then just the help didn't arrive in time, unfortunately, for her. So for my family, it was very devastating in the fact that we didn't know who to talk to, or some of the police that were investigating the situation, they were quite helpful and encouraged us to pursue the situation that had happened. But once again, being in Queensland, sister in Melbourne, I really didn't know who to turn to. Contacted Bowles, and from the very first phone call, the empathy and understanding was there. They knew exactly what I needed to foster that relationship with the legal team. They were great advocates and completely understood the situation we were in. Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. I'd also like to welcome Michaela Reynolds. Michaela, you have, and all of our community members who we're hearing from have a unique perspective, but one thing about your unique perspective is that you've been both a client of ALS New South Wales ACT, but also an employee, one of the team. Can you tell us about your story?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Reynolds. I'm the proud sister of Nathan Reynolds. Nathan passed away at John Moroney Correctional Centre in 2018. He suffered from an asthma attack. It took 40 minutes for help to arrive to Nathan's aid. Having ALS be the representation for my family made a huge difference. I couldn't have imagined having a better team represent my family. First of all, the point of contact from ALS was the most adequate point of contact. We had legal services from all over Australia make contact with us because they seen a civil claim could potentially come out of Nathan's death, and they wanted to jump on board and take on Nathan's coronial inquest. ALS did not obviously treat us like that. They were culturally appropriate. They were our point of contact whenever throughout 3 years. They answered us anytime we needed help. They supported us. They were a great team to work with, and yeah, I really think that without ALS being my family's legal team, I don't know who we would have had. Legal aid have quite a high means test. I'm not sure if we would have met their means, but we didn't have to worry about any of that burden with having ALS during that already tough time.
Thanks, Michaela. As Michaela, you and Matt, but also everybody, I think, perhaps on this call and maybe not, but a lot of our community know that there's no requirement for governments to implement recommendations of coronial inquests. For this reason, inquests often don't result in the critical changes that are needed to save lives into the future. But recently there was a more positive story. Veronica Nelson's inquest prompted a commitment from the Victorian government to reform bail laws, which forced her into custody and ultimately led to her death. And I just want to acknowledge Uncle Percy again and thank you for coming. Matt, your sister Nish was a talented artist who was known for her generosity. She also, as you said, had her challenges in life. If you're comfortable, can you tell us a bit about those challenges? How important was it for your family to receive sensitive and culturally safe legal support?
It was highly important. So my sister Narisha, she suffered from bipolar, depression, alcohol, drug abuse, to, I guess, help maintain her own sanity in some points of view. So her struggles were quite deep. We, as a family, tried to bring her out of a lot of this. So the support she had in Melbourne was there, but not sufficient enough. So then for the outcome of what happened, it's highly important for my family and I to be able to have a legal support team that completely understands every aspect of what my sister went through and what we're going through as well. Unfortunately for her, that's she can't keep walking with us and continuing on with her artwork and being that champion for the Indigenous youth throughout Australia. And we really lost quite a talented artist. So yeah, so I can't thank VOWS enough for being such a great support network for ourselves, because I think we can all appreciate how complex the justice system can be. Yeah, so, and they've been able to make it a lot easier for myself and my family.
Thanks, Matt, and lots of outpouring of support in the chat to you and to Michaela and to your families. Thank you, everyone. Keep sending that love through. Michaela, it was an incredible decision to work with other families who've lost loved ones in custody after going through the tragedy of your brother's death. What made you want to take on that work, and why is it important for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have support from people like you who have that community connection and lived experience? Just on mute, sis.
Always do that. Sorry. I see it as a privilege to be able to work in that position with families. I think once families knew of my story and the similar circumstances that I've been through as them, they felt comfortable, and we connected on an emotional level as well as a professional level. And I use this as an example. It's like when I was back in school and, you know, we always hung out with the Koori teachers, and in the Koori room, they just got it. They understood all the students on a culturally perspective. It was like that in my role at ALS, working with Aboriginal families. And I really did see it as a privilege to be able to work with them and help them get through this tough time, and for them to know that they are strong enough to get through a coronial inquest. And yeah.
Thanks, Michaela. We, a lot of the ATSOLs, and indeed like the people who make up the teams of ATSOLs, of course, have talked about like the workload crisis that is facing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal services around the country, and that our team members are trying to deal with. You worked at the ALS for a good few years, but you've moved on to another organisation now. Did that rising kind of workload crisis play any role in your decision to move on?
Personally, no, but I did see a high turnover throughout my few years at ALS due to this reason. ALS staff are supported internally very well by ALS, but financially not. Unfortunately, a lot of staff members have family and have children, and a lot of staff did leave because they could not live off the wage that ALS was providing them due to funding. And they did move on to most of them did move on to government organisations where they are supported better financially, not because they wanted to, because they had to. But I feel as if it's even hard to fill, once they leave, it's hard to fill these positions again, because people that see the wage and they can't take up these jobs because they can't afford to live based off the wage.
Yeah, absolutely. Like such extreme challenges in and you've had that experience of recruiting and retaining employees in an environment where people can go and get higher salaries elsewhere. including at other legal assistance providers such as legal aid. And the staff and employees of ATSLs right around the country are passionate and dedicated to their work. But as you've pointed out, Michaela, they've got to put food on the table. They've got to pay rent. They've got mortgages. They've got families to support. And the inadequacy of our funding has put us in a position where even those staff who would like to dedicate their careers to us often move elsewhere where they can get higher pay and different working conditions. Thank you very much. I want to thank you, Michaela, and also you, Matt, and Uncle Percy for coming and joining us and sharing your stories with us today. They are so powerful, and we're constantly reminded of the strength of community and the love that we bring fighting for one another and continuing to push forward in that movement. I want to remind everyone to send questions in the chat or in the interactive tool using the Q&A button. We won't be able to get to all of them today, but I do know like one of them that's come through is, you know, why is the government not funding services properly? What is their response to the need for more funding? These are really critical questions, and they're ones that we're asking. The link, of course, to the interactive tool is in the chat. We have a question that we'd like you to think about now. And of course, it's timely, I think, now that we've heard from those with lived experience. We want to know what worries you about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal services being forced to freeze services. It's an open-ended question, and it's something we want you to think about and write down in the interactive tool. We'll pull up the responses for everyone to see at the end of our next panel. I'm joined now by two of the leaders of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, Shane Duffy from ATSLs Queensland and Nerita Waite from the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, or VALS. Nerita, a shout out to you, sis. I know you've got COVID, and so thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand over to Nerita and then to Shane to briefly introduce themselves, please.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Carly. Unfortunately, I contracted COVID from my 5-year-old. Lovely little gift from him, but I'm excited to be here today and really talk about the challenges our service faces. I've been at VALS since 2014. I started as a lawyer, then moved into a dual role doing law and policy, and then I moved into the role of CEO. It's a wonderful organisation to work for with excellent staff, but the best part of it is the community we get to interact with each and every day.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Carly. I just want to acknowledge Matthew, Michaela and Uncle Percy. Yeah, we'll feel you. My name's Shane Duffy. I'm a Cockatoon fella from Mount Isa. So I was a former chair of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Service when it was under the old ATSIC boundaries of the QEA. I've been the CEO for the past 18 years and we've never seen the situation we're facing as we are today. Thank you.
Thank you to both. If, again, everyone, please join in this. If you have any questions for Nerita or Shane, please put them in the chat or put them in the interactive tool, and we'll do our best to get to a couple of them. My first question is for you, Nerita. Can you tell us a bit about what this crisis looks like for the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service?
So the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service is in a position where we do offer competitive salaries with that of Victoria Legal Aid, which is our counterpart in the sector, because we need to ensure that we can recruit skilled and expertise lawyers, but also that we can retain them. However, despite doing that, we're obviously confronted by increasing demand. At the moment, 38.5 Aboriginal people in Victoria are arrested each day. That results in flow on demand for our legal services, because not often when they contact us, it's just a criminal matter. They often flow into one of our other service areas, including family and civil. So what that means, just in raw numbers, is that we can face at any one time a 34% increase in criminal law matters, a 38% increase in family law matters, and civil sits at around 23%. And 86% of those clients also need support from our community staff members. That means our VAL CSOs, our family violence workers, and of course our custody notification service. Because of these numbers not being able to really meet that need. And you also have to understand the complexity of clients that are coming through. We see our clients have high rates of disability, high rates of mental health, high rates of homelessness, and all of these issues have to be addressed as well in any holistic legal response. So again, that means that we can't just look at somebody as simply a number on a book. We have to look at the person and who they are and what it is that they need and try and deliver that. That means we put a lot more energy and a lot more time into servicing our clients. Now, a lot of those in the mainstream sector will say, well, no, this is just a COVID-19 hangover. It's not. These numbers were significantly higher pre-COVID and have stayed the same post-COVID. We're not seeing any reduction in service demand. We're not seeing any less complex clients. Everything is continuing. What isn't is increased funding to support that demand. And that means that clients, have to compete with being one of 89 clients in a criminal law matter. Or a family lawyer, often they're holding anywhere between 80 and 930 files. Civil, similarly, because of the influx of child death inquiries, mental health hearings, tenancy work, and employment matters that just continue to purge our service.
Thanks, Narita. Those statistics are phenomenal, and thank you for also trying to talk about them in a way that is that reflects the people who sit behind them as well. I know that sometimes that is difficult to do. And there's a question in the chat, which is, will there be more closures if no more funding is made available? Will it get worse? Thank you for this question. Yes, is the answer. That's why we need to get active, and more on that soon. But I just want to go to Shane, and bring you into this conversation. You have actually been forced to put in place some temporary service suspensions in Queensland. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, thanks, Carly, and afternoon, everyone. So in Queensland, I think to look at the size of the organisation, there's 25 offices and some 260 staff across those locations. And 70% of our work from the legal side with the criminal, civil and family criminal law. Last year, we provided 78,000 advice, duty lawyer and casework matters. So I'll let you crunch the numbers between 78,000 and 260 staff. What we've done, the temporary service suspensions started taking place last year, actually, particularly in those areas in far north Queensland, out of Cairns and Townsville. We've also had suspensions, and these are major cities, so suspensions in Townsville, Cairns, Beenleigh, Ipswich, Brisbane itself as a major centre, Mount Isa, and consideration of many other of our offices across the state. So what we've done, and in no particular order, is full service suspensions. And we've made those decisions. They weren't easy decisions, but we made those decisions based on obviously the issue around the funding, but the workplace health and safety of our staff and the ethical issues. We've got some examples out of our Cairns office where criminal lawyers have carried 1,000 files in a 365-day period. At this point in time, we're 9 lawyers down in Cairns. And obviously Cairns service up into Cape York, the east and the west, but it also services down past Cairns south as well and up into the tablelands. So fresh arrest matters have been suspended, duty lawyer services have been suspended, and traffic court matters have been suspended at this time. Some services last year that were temporarily suspended have come back online, but basically we're facing the same issue: stagnant funding, increased workload, and in fact, this country locks up First Nations people, our people, per capita more than any other country on this planet Earth. And as we all know, the largest growing imprisonment rate is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. So we're really struggling to, as a bit different to Nerida in Victoria, we aren't matching the salary rates of legal aid, but salaries aren't are not but one indication of someone wants to work. The people that work for us are those really strong social justice bones in their bodies that want to stay for us. But when you've got a young family, etc., or you turn up to work every day and you hate coming to work because you feel sick in the stomach because you can't meet the needs of your client appropriately, because potentially you may have 300 open files running at the same time. So I see why people leave. What we're really about is ensuring, one, the appropriate funding, and we've used the Legal Aid Commission in Queensland as a benchmark. We're expecting some outcome from what we refer to in Queensland as a CBR submission in mid-July. There were some questions, Carly, you said, from people online today. Look, the bottom line is at this point in time, they are temporary service suspensions. They've been made in conjunction with the regional managers, so the people actually provide the services across the state in consultation with the staff, and they've given us the heads up of what they think is capable of not. So Cairns example, we've cut our services to 50% of our legal services that we're able to provide at full complement. And in the end, what it will cause is people going to jail.
Absolutely.
What makes me sick in the guts is potentially someone that is unwell, because we know a lot of our people are locked up and we have our underlying health issues. What if we drop the ball because of the organisation not taking an appropriate approach to remunerate, which is one, but two, protect the workplace health and safety of our staff, and in turn our communities who are being represented, protecting the efficacy that lawyers swear to as a part of being solicitors and or barristers as officers of the court, in making sure that they don't stretch themselves too thin because something has to give. The worst case scenario, and I always start the worst case and work back, is what if we stuffed up, someone went into jail and they actually died within a prison because of a lack of access to health services, as an example. So that's the extreme that our board and myself as a CR in Queensland say to people. We're dealing with life and death matters here. It's not about race, colour or creed. In this case, it is for blackfellas in this state. But we're just humans like everyone else. But we need a fair crack at the whip as well to make sure that we're funded for the exact same services that others provide, but more importantly, far more in quantity, and may I say, also better in quality.
Thanks, Shane. Really insightful. And I think it's interesting, and of course I have a perspective and some similar ones in terms of the balancing act that you're trying to make sure that you have safe working environments for teams, and we are delivering what community expect and deserve. And of course, we can't do that without our teams. Like, they are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, our boards, our teams, they are what means that we can have the impact that you talk about. One of the questions that was in the chat is actually about what you, let me just go to actually, what are the changes in funding have you seen during your 18 years with ATSLs? Is there anything that you wanted to say to that?
Yeah, then thank you for the question. Look, there's been an investment. I always say in this gig, we're at war. We are. We win a lot of the battles along the way. We'll never win the war, but we'll keep battling along. We have had an increase in funds over the years, but nothing to the levels that's sustainable. Basically, it's a piecemeal offering. You wouldn't fairly rat on, let's be honest about that. We have amazing staff who are there, as I said, not just for the money, but what has changed is professionalism of the business or the organisation. the standards within the business and what we've moved along as large evolving organisations. As large evolving organisations, we don't have the resources to be able to implement the strategies, not only to meet the internal needs of the business, but more importantly, or just as importantly, is to be able to meet the needs of community and ensuring that they have access to justice.
Thanks, Shane. So many questions kind of coming through in the chat. Thank you. And including, some again about how you can get involved to support this. And we will actually be sharing some things shortly in ways that you can be involved. Nerita, I wanted to come back to you. You mentioned earlier that actually you started back at Bowles in 2014 as a civil law lawyer, and then also worked across other practice areas and roles as well. Can you give us some insight into the pressures faced by a lawyer on the front line at an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal service?
It's not an easy life. It means constantly trying to cope with the numbers coming through intake, trying to decide which clients get a service and which clients don't, who takes priority and why. It means often spending a lot of the time on the road as you travel from regional city to regional city and then back through Metro Melbourne. It means often trying to not only to do the work of the lawyer, but do the work of those programs that are funded by the justice system internally. And that's really hard. It also means dealing with the trauma that you're exposed to on not just a weekly basis, but a daily basis. It means always feeling that you're failing and that you're always letting somebody down. And it feels like you're battling a system that you're just not going to get anywhere. Sometimes you have those incredible moments where you've been able to change the law, whether it be through a case or whether it be through engaging in policy reform, and those perk you up. But then you've got to go back to your normal court day. And particularly last year when we had to institute basically rolling lockdown. So first we started small, and that meant just really kind of focusing on what VLA were providing and cutting down all of our early and preventative legal services. Then, unfortunately, because numbers were so high, we then had to cut services entirely. So that meant doing nothing because our current demand was so high. We had to get all those clients through the door to ensure that our lawyers had safe practice loads. The most surprising thing for all of you might be that it was our lawyers who struggled with that the most. It was our lawyers who were the most resistant to shutting down service provision because they wanted to continue to be there for community because they knew that community would go unrepresented. They knew that would lead to poor outcomes. And most of all, they knew that it's not just the client facing imprisonment. It is the client who's coming to you because they're experiencing family violence and police and institutions won't listen to them. Those matters are just as crisis points for us and matter just as much. And they knew that there would be nobody there for them. So that's what it's like, Carly. And even when we lifted the 3-month freeze, which turned into 9 months in order to get that demand under control, it was really hard for them to go back out on the circuit, to go back into community because they felt like they had let them down. And they also got a bit of attitude from courts and other legal providers about having to freeze service delivery. And now that we're facing that same situation again, we've already started cutting back services and now we're actually looking at, well, where do we have to freeze and cut back entirely? We're facing those same issues and it's not easy for them. And it's also not easy for our community staff who are often based in communities and have to justify those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thanks, Nerita. And we heard from Michaela earlier, of course, about her role at the ALS and what some of those challenges were as well. And from, the pressures on our employees and our teams, from our admin to our lawyers to our fieldies to our court support officers to our program staff to, you know, there are obviously so many important team members that we have. I'm going to switch to the impact on community and to clients. Shane, what's the impact on clients and community when you've been forced at Axles Queensland to suspend services temporarily?
Yeah, Carly, it's I suppose the impacts are different internal in the organisation and externally into our mob out on country. The internal is exactly what Nerita was saying there before. Our staff are absolutely gutted that they have to not provide services, even though they're struggling themselves emotionally and spiritually because of not only what they deal with, but the workloads. They're upset about having to cut services because their commitment, not only to their current clients, but also to any potential clients because of, you know, their commitment to social justice. What it will mean, as I said, touched on before, is let's hope it doesn't end up a worst case scenario. But I would suggest, with not only the changes in laws here in Queensland recently, that we can expect potentially more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to end up in custody because of the lack of that cultural safety, cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity. We employ Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as paralegals, as administration, and as lawyers, and it takes a whole team, as you said before, Carly, to work together to grapple with the changes and feeling gutted. But more importantly, from internally, is for them to be able to regroup and get themselves strengthened up again. Externally, it's a reputational, it's a brand issue because our mob come to us first and foremost before anyone else. And the miscommunication, particularly the comments from Nerita before, the comments coming from the courts, from the bench, may I say, at different levels, having a go at our staff with their inability to meet what they're trying to do, particularly in Cairns, with 50% of the lawyers not being employed. So what's really important is to be able to keep that communication open with community. But, you know, it's not easy particularly when you get them old people ringing you up and, well, growl you one way, but another one is our inability to be able to change. But may I also say our sweetness has always been our weakness, our commitment to our mob, to our families, to our communities, right across this country, has been part of the problem why the backbones come to this stage at the moment. And that is our commitment to community. So for all the pain and hurt that it will cause, I'd hope there's some long-term gain where we can actually be funded at an appropriate level to be able to meet the true needs to the many challenges, but more importantly, the solutions that this organisation has, but also our community members have in Queensland as well.
Thanks, Shane. And there are some really important questions that are coming through around various issues of law reform. And yes, these are absolutely important things that we need to campaign on. Of course, right now we are in a funding emergency and we need to do both. These things are not mutually exclusive. We know, and we've heard from lots of people today, that when culturally safe legal support isn't available, the result is more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in custody, more families torn apart, more intergenerational trauma. And these might be some of the things that you're worried about. So let's, if we could pull up those answers from our question before of what worries you about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal services being forced to freeze services. Loss of jobs, people not getting the representation they need and deserve. Another voice lost, another kick in the guts, broken families, higher rates of incarceration. Nerita or Shane, do you want to address any of these briefly? We also, of course, want to make sure that there's some time for questions from the audience.
Carly, I can't get back to the camera, so.
Oh, no worries.
But may I say, like all the questions is really hard to answer, but other than to say is that we spend all of our time 24/7 looking at the solutions to the challenges that are being popped up, dealing with institutional racism, unconscious bias, unconscious racism, so on and so forth every day. But we will still continue as best we can to try and deal with injustices, but be solution focused moving forward, and being community led from community controlled organisations.
Thanks, Shane. And I also just see in the chat, Senator David Shoebridge, thanks so much for bringing this together and giving us some collective insights. Strength to all of you. So much depends on getting adequate public funds well before the next NLAP round. This can't wait for a 2024 review. And there are lots of things coming through. What I think is we'll do is collect all of the comments and of course send these directly to the Attorney General and also to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. I might just pause here and see if there are some questions that we might put to the panel. Narita, are you still online? Just want to check. I know you're crook, so I just want to make sure you're still
persevering.
Coming into the chat now.
I think it's important though, Carly, that everyone understands that it's not just criminal law services that ALSs provide, that we do a lot of work in other early and preventative areas of law, such as civil and human rights. And particularly with the escalating mental health crisis in our communities, that's an area of practice that we are engaged in. And certainly we're not saying that we just need more money for criminal services. We're saying we need more money to hire people to engage in areas of law across the board. And that means also doing strategic litigation, which is one strength of our organisation, because we do want to make sure that we are making those arguments for our rights that often can go by the wayside when we're just trying to survive. We want to be creating legal systems where we can thrive, where my main concern each day isn't who possibly out of that 38.5 people arrested each day is going to die, or incur, unspeakable trauma through the hyper-incarceration that's occurring in this country. So just want to assure people that we're asking for funding across the board. We are not forgetting those early intervention spaces. We are not saying that they're not worthy. We're saying we just need to be able to do it all.
Yeah, thanks, Narita. And I think that goes to like Effie's question in terms of by focusing on punitive systemic responses, are we reinforcing those negative models? And so thank you. And I hope that answers your question, Effie and others. It absolutely, while I think some of the service freezes that are happening are starting kind of in criminal law spaces, particularly at ALS, New South Wales, ACT, some of this is also because there isn't a team of 10 that you can take offline to do this whole of organisation systemic. Everyone is out doing a particular role, and we run such lean operations. But I mean, we're certainly at ALS New South Wales ACT very focused on our care and protection team and also our other team members. But it is kind of almost a bit of a working through things systematically as well and iteratively. I did say at the beginning that I was going to read out a statement from the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, who has provided that to us. I just wanted to thank Narita and Shane for answering those questions, and to thank all of our speakers, Michaela, Matt, Uncle Percy, and all of you who have hung around or provided a comment or a question here today. The Attorney General Mark Dreyfus did provide a statement, and I'm going to read that out to you now. I have been meeting with ATSLs across the country for many years now. In those meetings, I have heard directly about the positive impact ATSLs can have on individuals' life and often their family and community. I note with concern your advice about the imminent service delivery freezes and closures across some ATSLs. I emphatically support the role of ATSLs in providing accessible, culturally appropriate legal and non-legal services and programs to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who remain disproportionately represented at all points of contact within the justice system. It has been my long-standing view that Aboriginal legal assistance is some of the most challenging legal and advocacy work. I sincerely thank ATSLs and NATSLs for the crucial work you do to support First Nations people. I recognise that funding for ATSLs must match the high demand for services. An independent review of the National Legal Assistance Partnership is commencing this year. The review will be an important vehicle for any substantial changes in funding arrangements. It will include an assessment of unmet legal need and demand in all areas, including across disadvantaged groups in regional, rural and remote Australia. The NLAP review will also look at options for alternative funding arrangements for ATSLs. I encourage ATSLs to actively engage with the NLAP review. I remain committed to working with all ATSLs, and I urge continued engagement with my office and the Attorney General's Department. Thank you to the Attorney for providing that statement. Those are his words, and now it's your turn to make your voice heard. Before we close this meeting, I want to let you know that we are calling on you to make your voice heard and to show your support for our culturally safe legal services and the communities that we serve. We are launching our petition today, and I just want to acknowledge that we are calling for emergency funding for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal services. The more signatures we get, the more impact we can make. Please make sure to sign it and share it with your networks. The link is in the interactive tool and in the chat. We, of course, will be in touch again after this meeting. And I just want to thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Please, again, we strongly encourage you to sign our petition. The link is in the interactive tool and in the chat. Have a great rest of the day and stay safe.